Osprey Orielle Lake is the founder and president of the Women's Earth and Climate Caucus and co-chair of International Advocacy with the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. She's also the author of Uprisings for the Earth, Reconnecting Culture with Nature, which has been described as a frank inquiry into a variety of causes leading to our current global peril, which also provides a deep well of hope and profound insight. In addition, she's the sculptor behind the International Monumental Art Project, creating 18-foot bronze sculptures to be installed in a variety of locations around the world. She describes this project as an epic love poem to life in the form of sculpted bronze. We began our conversation by sharing our impressions of the remarkable summit meeting of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature that was held in Quito, Ecuador in January 2014.
I think that in the history of the rights of nature movement and rights of Mother Earth, that both of the summit itself as well as the ethical tribunal are really historical. I think that we will really mark this time, that a time of a pivot really deeper into this work, and also I think that the solidarity that was built over this last week, not only with Ecuadorians who are of course living in a country that has rights of nature in their constitution, but also with all the different international leaders who are engaged with this work, all the way from Australia to Europe, all over different places in Europe, the United States. We see really an international body of people from South Africa as well, really uniting around this work, and I think it was extremely potent for everyone to see how we are all fighting for the same things. And as we hear different cases, especially at the tribunal that we held, hearing all these different cases and understanding that behind it all, we want system change, and rights of nature is an incredibly powerful tool for the kind of change at the level that we need to see it now to happen through that tool and mechanism of rights of nature.
Yeah, I agree. And I had the sense that the room was full of people who had finally found their tribe. You know, and it's a worldwide tribe. It's a tribe of ideas, of values, of attitudes, and so on. And so there's this terrific energy flowing among the participants.
Yeah, I think that why it is so sort of an energized group of people is that everyone is there, I think, for, they might have different entry points of how they came to rights of nature and rights of Mother Earth. But they all, we all share a vision of a paradigm shift in how we're living with each other and the earth. And we also know we're in a time of great crisis, especially environmentally, but also with our monetary systems. Things are crumbling apart, things are falling apart, things are not as they should be. And to me, of course, because my field is in climate change, and so we deal with issues of water and land and food sovereignty and many results of what happens with climate change in different communities around the world. We're seeing that the window of time to act is so small. So when you're with this group of people, I think it's just so exciting because you're with people who understand that we've all made a stand, if you will. We've all said, this is the most important thing we could be doing, is fighting for future generations, healing our communities, healing the earth. And so you're with the most wonderful comrades you can imagine in this difficult journey.
You know what? One of the things that got us excited, and the reason that we're here, is having done a whole range of interviews. We've done about, I guess we're well over 60 now, and all kinds of different issues. When we stumbled upon the rights of nature movement, we suddenly realized this is the unified field theory of the environmental movement. This is the thing which, if you got that, all the other things can be dealt with, and one at a time. But this is the foundational change that really seems to be required. And I thought that was, I also liked something that Cormac said, which was that those of us who understand that and are working on that are in a sense building a different society to which people can defect. It's a great phrase, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that, and also going back to Buckminster Fuller, I don't remember his quote exactly, but there's a certain point when you need to just stop fighting the old system, because the old system is no longer functioning, and you need to build the reality that you want to see. And I think that's what we're seeing with the rights of nature movement. And I think also really key in this particular gathering, and I think it's incredibly important that we had it here in Ecuador. What happened here, I don't think could have happened in another country right now for a variety of reasons. I think one, that they have rights of nature in their constitution obviously makes Ecuador particularly important, but also the huge indigenous presence here. And I think that we can't forget that so many of the actions in the environmental movement per se have not really honored indigenous people to the degree that we really need to as we're talking about society change. Because while we're looking at, defecting, if you will, from our current paradigm and our current society into a new one we're building, I think it's so important to remember that indigenous peoples for thousands of years, and when we leave them in an intact society that they've built, have been living in a way that has been in harmony with nature and shows really good practices and a respect for the natural laws of our earth. So I think we need to also remember that while we're looking forward, we're also pulling from ancient wisdoms. And I think that was particularly emphasized in this summit and also at the tribunal.
Well, the tribunal that was amazing, how the presence of indigenous people there. And I don't know if it was you or somebody remarked that they didn't often see a situation where indigenous people and non-indigenous people work together as smoothly and as respectfully and as unified a way as happened at the summit.
Yeah, well, I think it's something that I know I've been working with the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature for the International Advocacy working group for the last years, and it's something that is core to our work because we have indigenous peoples as an example, and having a worldview or their cosmology that is deeply embedded in a respect for nature. So we really can't do this work without them, nor should we. And the whole idea of buen vivir, living well, I think was discussed in more depth than I've ever experienced at our gatherings before. And I think because we brought so many indigenous people and so much indigenous leadership into every aspect of the work the last week. But also, this work is evolving because we've met in Rio Plus 20 Earth Summit as a group. We've met at different United Nations climate negotiations. We've had various meetings where internationally we've come together. So each time we further the conversation. I think it's one of the most exciting things is to be in a societal change where you actually are creating the evolution as you meet and share these ideas and learn and experiment and explore together. And I think one of the things I was talking to Tom Goldtooth yesterday that sort of bubbled up this time more than ever was the idea about buen vivir and indigenous leaders this time saying, good, we feel like we've really expressed to all of you this idea of buen vivir and living well, and you sort of get it, about living in harmony with nature, but actually it's incredibly sophisticated. And some of that information was unpacked a lot more in this meeting, and I thought that was really valuable.
I thought so too. I thought that was, and I thought it's really important to have people there who have an experience of living in a way that is truly sustainable. I don't really like that word because it sounds quite boring, but people who've lived in a way that can go on indefinitely without spoiling itself as it goes along. To have that right there.
Well, and I think one story that really touched me was I had an opportunity to meet with about 30 of the indigenous women leaders from the Amazon. There was a wonderful meeting that was set up for them to meet with Vanda Nishiva because, of course, she has a long history of coming here and supporting the struggles of the women farmers here and the women's struggles in general. And so Vanda and I were invited to come and sit with them and hear directly their stories and their struggles and their resistant movements from the Amazon. And one woman said something that was just so intriguing because we got into a conversation about what is wealth. Really, what is wealth? And she was saying how she had an opportunity to go to the United States. And one of the things that really shocked her is seeing that we had one kind of corn. She would go to the store and see one kind of corn, and that the animals eat that corn and we eat that corn. And she said, you're really poor because, in my village we have at least 10 different corns, and we have corn for this, and we have corn to feed the children, and we have corn for this situation, corn for this time of the year, and we're so wealth in this diversity of corn. And it was just expressing, just feeling sorry that we were so poor in our food systems. And so I think that that's another, description of buen vivir, and we had a big conversation about, really what is wealth. And I think that's something that we need to change in our Western worldview, and that we can learn so much from indigenous peoples about that. Yeah.
I also thought that the tribunal was a fantastic thing. particularly as it evolved over the course of the week even. I mean, at the beginning of the week, I don't think it was high on anybody's radar screen. It was an idea that was floating around, but by the end of the week, there was this remarkable event took place with the clear sense that there was a momentum, that this was really basically, it was like a preliminary hearing. Is there enough evidence here to bring this this alleged criminal to trial? And the answer in each case was yes, there is enough for that. Well, then it follows that there has to be a trial. And I thought to myself, I can see this evolving in such a way that people it'll accrete to itself a tremendous amount of credibility as it comes up with the right cases and makes good judgments. And I was struck with this particularly with Esperanza's presentation about the BP spill, because I think all over the world people have been saying, that's it? I mean, we've had this catastrophic spill and nothing's been done about it. No heads have rolled. Nobody's gone to jail. The company hasn't been dismantled. Yes, it's lost money. That's only money. But we've lost biodiversity and habitat and all that sort of stuff. And nobody pays for that, So the idea that there is a tribunal where you go, where that kind of case can be brought, even if all that you can bring to bear on it is moral sanctions, at least in the beginning, I think it's a huge, huge step.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the use of that tool of a tribunal is incredibly powerful, and so it came up I guess it was just about 3 or 4 weeks actually before we came to Ecuador, that we were thinking, we all knew we were going to come to Quito on Friday to have a larger meeting than we'd been having earlier in the week in our retreat. And we thought, gee, if we just do a summit, it won't be as interesting as if we take this to the next level and use the tribunal as an educational format. And I think it is very powerful because also, look, we're running out of time here. Our systems are collapsing. We are destroying the earth at a rapid rate. We don't have time to not bring things forward in a way that, one, provides media attention and also educates people about really how serious it is and making our own judgment, since the government here is not following rights of nature laws as is in the Constitution. We have to really take power in our own hands to do that, but also internationally. So I think the thing that's very important to understand too about the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature is there's also this legal component. It's a combination of changing our cultural perspective, changing our relationship to each other and Mother Earth, and really respecting the water, the air, our food, and really changing how we've been living for a very long time. But this other aspect is very important, which is that there are cases that now communities have ordinances where they are now saying, we want to say what happens to our ecosystems. We want to say what happens to our waterways in our community. We don't want fracking in our community. I think it's really important.
We're not prepared to delegate that either.
No.
Right?
Well, that's the whole point, is that we're really standing the current, in the United States and other places around the world, changing the laws that are in existence right now. And we need to understand that's how revolutionary this work is, as it should be, because we've been looking at environmental laws in the United States for 40 years, and things have gotten worse and worse and worse. So clearly it's not working. And we know that we need a legal structure that can confront corporations and state law to say, we want to have a say in the governance of our community, and not have a state law and corporations trump the citizens who live in that community. And I think that's one of the most valuable parts at the ground level of the rights of nature work and community ordinances and community rights, is giving the power back to the people who live in their communities and push from the bottom up, because that's how we need to do it in the United States and in communities around the world, is have it be a grassroots movement to demand rights. And I think that's what we're going to see more and more coming to the next year, is more and more communities getting educated about really what their power is to do this.
Yeah, and there probably are different ways to do that in different places and different circumstances, but one of the things also that I think became very clear to me, and it wasn't a total surprise, but it was interesting to see it come up over and over again, was that how foundational this kind of thing is, that the legal systems really are like the DNA or the organizing principles of a whole society. And you don't even realize how pervasive they are in setting out what can be done and what can be said and what can be thought even, until you really stand back and take a close look at them. And of course the rights of nature stuff would change all of that.
Absolutely. I mean, like you were mentioning the BP case, I mean, there's no place for justice to be had. Yeah. There's no place truly in our current legal structure for justice to be had. So, and for the river and the mountain and the ecosystem to have a voice. and to have communities have a voice about what they want to have in their communities, we have to invent that, we have to create that, and that's what's really exciting about this work. But we also need to look at, historical cases that we can also reference, like slavery, and the abolition of slavery, or the end of apartheid. I mean, we've seen moves like this, and we have to understand that's what we're talking about. Yeah. We're talking about when women got the right to vote. We're talking about the ending of slavery. We're talking about a transformation at a grand scale about everything about how we've been governing ourselves.
Yeah. You just said something I thought was incredibly revealing, and it was there's no place for the mountains, the rivers, the earth, and communities to be heard. And that "and communities" is the really interesting piece, because for two reasons. One, because it underlines that we are part of the whole picture. But second, it also underlines that communities themselves have been dispossessed in the same way that nature has been. I think that became really clear in some of what Tom and Mary said. And that was another one of the sort of underpinning insights from the whole conference, is that there is no gap, and that statement, no gap between human beings and nature, and that statement turns out to have all kinds of ramifications we kept seeing all through the week. Right?
Absolutely, and I think that one of the moments of solidarity this week that we all experienced is that, we're really seeing that the corporate structure as we have it now, our economic structures as we have them now, are really not on the side of nature and communities. And so we have to be able to directly confront those systems. And they're all intertwined, and they really create a vicious cycle. Yeah. And we have to really understand that we didn't just sort of end up with, huge problems with extractive industries, whether it's oil or minerals, and huge problems with climate change out of nowhere. They're a development problem that we've been in a structure of development that we've been engaged in for hundreds of years. And the end result we can see is disastrous.
Yeah. Is there anything more about the summit itself that you want to add, or can I change the subject to you?
Let's see. I just think for 1 minute if there's something we want to capture here that we haven't. I think that what will be exciting is where we're going from here. Mm-hmm. I think we created a new level of our foundation together as a Global Alliance for Rights of Nature and everyone involved. And I think the other thing that's really important to mention is I hope that we've also lent some support for a lot of the leaders in this community, both the Indigenous and non-Indigenous leaders. In Ecuador. Yeah. Who are on the front lines and who are the defenders of the earth here, who are getting criminalized for their actions. And we know, since rights of nature is in the Constitution of Ecuador, they should be able to express their concerns or critique of the government around this legislation, and that's not what's going on. Yeah. So I really hope that our presence here, that was one of our goals, is to support the one country in the world that has rights of nature in their legislation, and the people here who live here in these communities who are trying to exercise that right.
There's an interesting question there that Alberto Acosta and I were just discussing, and that is, when the government misbehaves, acts in an illegal way, what do? The government is the enforcer of the law, and if the government floats the law, you're now into a whole different arena. We've got the same thing in Canada. We've got, a government that the Supreme Court says you have to bring this Canadian citizen back from Guantanamo Bay, where he's been interned as a terrorist. And the government essentially says, interesting to hear from you. And don't call us, we'll call you. Yeah. And what do?
Well, I think that's what's exciting about the international community coming here and having a press conference in which we're saying, look, there was such a vision that was put out by President Correa around Yasuni Initiative, rights of nature, and what we're saying is we want to support you in having that original vision. Yeah. And I think that's really key, and that we can really make that demand and support our sisters and brothers here by saying that. Yeah.
I agree. I think that was
it was really important.
And it was a good feeling to feel that you were here and saying some of the things that they were having trouble with, Yeah. And, okay, let's talk about you.
Okay, that was good.
Tell me about the Women's Caucus, and give it its full proper
name.
So
I'm the founder and director of the Women's Earth and Climate Caucus, which is based in California. And I'm also founded with another colleague the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network. And so it's a large network of women that work internationally on climate change issues, but of course we call it Women's Earth and Climate Caucus because you can't talk about the climate without talking about food and water and energy issues, which are very much on the ground, and the rights of nature. Actually our founding principles are rights of women, rights of Indigenous peoples, rights of nature, and rights of future generations. And we found that having those 4 pillars was an incredible way to bring all these different women together and weave together a large enough umbrella for all the women to participate. And the other component of that is that it's very dedicated to a cross-sector analysis of this work because we think climate change is so sophisticated and complex that you have to have many entry points. So we have women who are engaged with economics and climate change, policymakers. We have women grassroots leaders. We have women who are involved in fossil fuel resistance movements. And just this last September in 2013, we had a very large summit in New York where we had Vandana Shiva there, Jane Goodall. We had the Secretariat of the United Nations Climate Negotiations, Christiana Figueres, Sylvia Earle, who you might know with the oceans.
Sylvia Earle is high on my list of people to interview for the
she's amazing. Yeah. So, very well-known women, but also incredible leaders whose names we don't know, Indigenous women leaders who are equally important and powerful in their constituencies. And we got together and had a 3.5-day strategy session, really. And out of that, we came together with a declaration statement that's now circulating around the world that's very progressive on what needs to happen. And we're about to finish up the Women's Climate Action Agenda, which is a project we're all working on collectively to really lay out what do we need to do to keep us below 2 degrees rise in global temperatures. And for us, we don't see climate change as an issue. We see climate change as a condition and an urgent condition that we have to act upon. And it's really a message from Mother Earth that pretty much everything we're doing is not working.
That's amazing, yeah. And so you've got, through the network, you've got different people working on different aspects of this all over the world, but so you've got a global exchange going also.
We do,
right? Yeah?
we do. We're young, so we're still strategically figuring out exactly what we want to do with the network, but most immediately as an example, we are involved in, Eve Ensler is putting together, she has this large organization that last year started something called 1 Billion Rising, where women around the world made a statement against women against violence. And this year the theme is about justice. So she asked us to put on an event around women and climate justice. So we have about 20 actions we're organizing right now for February 14th, 2014, of women demonstrating their communities, either why women are the most negatively impacted by climate change and environmental degradation, or a solution. And then we'll show these videos and photographs. And I was working here with some women in Ecuador. We're going to be demonstrating some of what's happening with the women in the Amazon. But all over the world, we work with women in Congo who are trying to protect the Congo forests. So many different actions around the tar sands, but also women showing local organic farming and what their solutions there around seed saving and how important that is to reductions in carbon emissions by doing local organic farming. So it's going to be a combination of what women are fighting for, but also what their solutions are. And so that's an immediate thing we're doing. But in the long term, we're really showing women's leadership in a variety of ways because when we did our original research around this women's network, we found that many people don't realize that between like 60 and 80% of all food production around the world is done by women. They do the seed saving. So when we're talking about food security and food sovereignty as we head into more serious extreme weather conditions, you need to work with the women. It's true in developing countries around water as well. Women are the ones who collect the water. They are the ones who use the water for bathing. They know where the water is. If you want really to change and be careful about your water resources, you need to engage women. It's true around population, economics. When you empower and engage women, all of these things improve. So it's a huge constituency that's really been untapped and focused, and that's what we're really looking at as a women's global climate action network that can really be put into play. And we've seen this in other movements where, everything from the civil rights movement in the United States, women were hugely important to that, or gaining the right to vote. And so we know that this is a time women need to really step forward, ending the war in Libya. We're just seeing different types of things where it's just key to engage women's leadership at this time.
This sounds absolutely wonderful, and it's a huge task, but it's also a huge opportunity as you go along. There's some figures that stand behind a lot of what we're doing here, and one of them is Thomas Berry, who's very important to you, right? And his concept of the great work. It seems to me this is a great example of the great work, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think Thomas Berry, sort of in, I don't remember really which book it was in, but he did talk about the importance of lifting up the Mother Goddess again. He actually got into a whole dialogue about the image of the Great Mother and how the downcasting of that image was really detrimental to society, and how important it is to lift that up again. And I think that so many people are saying that in a variety of ways of the power of women's voices, and how we've been living in a patriarchal, hierarchical structure for a really long time. And I think the violence against the earth and the violence against women is historically very interrelated. And so one of the reasons that we have, the rights of women, the rights of Indigenous people, the rights of nature, and rights of future generations is we think these are the voices that have been silenced. And when you're looking for balance and healing, you need to really bring forward the voices that have been missing. And so I think there's a relationship here that we're really emphasizing in our network.
Yeah, and that's a huge piece of what Berry would have called the great work, where we're trying to transform the world into something that's more sustainable on a long-term basis, much more satisfying ultimately, much more comfortable and pleasant to live in, I would, when we get there. And,
well, we're certainly working on it, and I think that is a really important part of visioning as we go forward, is that I think it came up in the conversation for the summit, but it's something we discuss in our network, is we need a new cultural narrative. The old story, as Thomas Berry would say, is no longer working, and we're in between stories, and we need a new story. So we're looking at, what is our new cultural narrative, so that when we're saying no, we don't want these old governance structures and these old laws of the environment that are not really helping us. They're really there to regulate damage. The regulatory laws of the environment are there to regulate damage. They're not there to transform the system or help us create a new paradigm. That we need to look at what is our narrative. And I think one of the things that was very valuable coming out of this week, and I'm doing some personal research on this as well for a book I'm working on right now, is this whole concept of the original instructions that Indigenous people talk about, and really staying true to our original instructions about how to live in right relationship or a good way with the earth and each other. And I think that Indigenous people can share with us a lot, and we can learn a lot about those original instructions. And again, for Western society, how do we sort of retrace our original instructions? And I think the rights of nature work both legally in terms of our governance structures, but also culturally can be very valuable to us in sort of, reconnecting with those original instructions. I think that's very valuable. And I think the other piece of the cultural narrative that's very important is, what do we want? What are these societies we're wanting? Everything from, the transition movement to eco-villages, eco-cities, permaculture movement. I think there's a whole variety of people really working on that piece. The degrowth movement, how do we change off of a capitalist structure that is dedicated to, endless growth? We're on a finite planet, we just can't keep using up resources like this, and how do we get off this system? I think it's a huge question, and we have to keep exploring these alternatives. And I think that's a very valuable and key part of the work.
And for you, biomimicry has been a really important concept, and it strikes me as you talk that originally I had thought of biomimicry, and probably Janine Benyus had too, as looking at the natural physical structures and seeing how those could be used, for us to live in a better, more sustainable way. But I think you're taking it one step further. I think you're also saying biomimicry has a lot to do with the story, has a lot to do with the new narrative.
I do. I think biomimicry is, one of the most exciting, developments in the last, 20, 30 years is looking to nature to be our teacher and guide in terms of how we make things and how we do things, and seeing that nature has been, experimenting and exploring for millions of years. We should, and doing it without damaging the earth and creating these beautiful ecosystems. But I do think, looking at it sort of from a cultural perspective, it's like looking at a healthy ecosystem. The more we connect it to itself, it gets healthier and healthier. And that diversity brings us health. And I think that's what we need to look at. And when we look at the planet, we see that 80% of the biodiversity that's left on our earth is inhabited by Indigenous peoples on their lands. I think that's a huge statement and something we really need to look at deeply, how they're living and why the biodiversity is on lands and their territories. And what can that teach us? And in terms of the biodiversity work, I think that the biomimicry work, I think that, biomimicry is ancient and old to Indigenous peoples, of looking at nature and seeing how nature operates with itself and then mimicking that and following those patterns. And I think it's something that's going to be absolutely essential as we go forward.
It's one of those ideas that once you've seen it, it seems obvious, but how come you didn't see it for the first 6 or 8 decades of your life?
And also it's just so fun. Like I remember reading about this, I think it was in Zimbabwe where they looked at a structure for a large building complex. And what they did is they were looking at large ant hills in the region and how they're self-cooling, the way that the ants have all the tunnels and they carve out their mound. And they mimicked that. They put that into the design of these buildings. And it made it, I don't remember the percentage, but it was hugely much more energy efficient using the structure exactly like the anthill inside this building. So there's so many wonderful examples of biomimicry about how we could be more energy efficient and how we can model nature's designs.
I want to come back even more to you because I've been reading your books and I've been learning a bit about your work. And one of the things that struck me early on was the importance to you of quietness and of listening. Do you want to talk about that, why that's so important? Because that's quite another remove from things like biomimicry, which are highly social.
Yeah, I think that, one of the things, when we've discussed it so much this week in the summit is that, we understand intellectually that we're not separate from nature. And there was a lot of sort of philosophical conversation around so much of the damage that's happening on Earth is Western people or modern day people feeling separate from nature. And I think there's a whole historical reason how that happened, which is, too long of a story for now, but, we've had that understanding that we feel disconnected from the trees, from the land, from the water, and not that this is our mother, but other, nature as other. And I think one of the most central ways that we can change that is by having quiet time in the natural world. It's something, not very many modern day people do. Over half the world's population now lives in cities. So, having quiet time, wherever you live, for me, it's the redwoods of Northern California and the Pacific Ocean. And to have time quiet in nature, I think is so healing, first of all, but also gives us a sense of dignity and connection that we can't get watching television or, the busyness of our everyday lives or staring into all of our clever devices, which I love all my clever devices. But, I think that if we actually don't have time in nature or time in that quietude, we don't get the kind of reflection about who we are, first of all, as human beings. And just the joy and beauty and awe of the natural world isn't something offered to us because we don't experience it. And if we don't experience it, we can't fall in love with it. And I think, in addition to all of our passion about, survival right now, the other aspect is just the beauty and awe-inspiring fact of nature and the numinosity of life that so many people are missing out on. And I think this is a piece we can never leave out because, one of the problems, as we've been discussing, is our economic structure, and a big part of that, what drives it, is consumerism. And as I wrote about in my book, I think, I don't think it's the only reason, but there's a huge component of consumerism that's based on a deep emptiness that modern day people have spiritually and emotionally. And I think it's because of this disconnect from nature. And so there's a need to sort of like keep filling yourself up with more stuff as you feel empty inside. And if you can just get enough stuff, you might be fulfilled. And, a good walk along the ocean regularly, and on an ongoing basis, not it's like a special thing on vacation, we go to Hawaii, but really understanding that we need time in nature to feel this deep connection and to see the stars at night and get the measure of us living on a planet by seeing the stars and the cosmos is really key to this work.
That passage in your book about listening and about engagement with the outdoors like that, explains to me a couple of things about my own life that had sort of puzzled me. Like I've done an awful lot of sailing and cruising under sail and so forth. And what is it that's so addictive you know, that my wife and I sailed from Nova Scotia down to the Bahamas, all down the east coast of the United States. But what is it that's so addictive about being out there at sea on a small boat? It's exactly that. I mean, it's exactly that connection with the natural world. You know, so I was very grateful to have another way of seeing that, because I've always been a little puzzled by the fact that I go out there and nothing much seems to happen. I sit there, the sails pull, the wind blows, and I come back feeling deeply satisfied, you know. And,
yeah, and it's so wonderful that you do that, because so many people really don't have a way that they've sort of carved out in their life to do that. And I think it's absolutely key. You know, we can't do this intellectually. It really is about feeling the Mother Earth and listening to her and taking time and appreciating the flowers. You can't do it by watching a TV show on the ocean. It just doesn't work. We actually need to physically be in the wild.
Yeah, the one last big issue that I wanted to mention is you've got a Monumental Art Project going on here. Tell us about that.
Well, actually it's on hold right at the moment, but I can tell you about it anyway. But yes, I've done sculpture work for many, many years. And, you know, I think, I know, actually going back to Thomas Berry and others, I think images are really important, and how they work in our symbol mind. And symbols are very important. And so when I set out to do my artwork, I've done a lot of art images around nature and uplifting images of women. And it's, again, you know, looking at the voices and the images and the symbols that have been downcast over the last several thousand years, and how that can bring healing and balance by telling the stories through art of women and nature. And so that's really what drove me to doing the art in the first place, is, you know, how can we create a new cultural narrative by bringing forward the voices that have been oppressed and missing, that I believe really are part of how we got ourselves in this condition. You know, imbalance in nature is never a good thing, and imbalance in human society is not a good thing, as we've seen. You know, for me, it's not about pushing men down, but it's about lifting women up, and women and men, and the balance of female and male working together. And I think that that's going to make a huge contribution to changing our society.
So tell me about the sculptures.
Oh, yeah, the Chima project involves placing 8 18-foot tall bronze statues around the world, and they're dedicated to the earth. And the images of a woman and an eagle. So, and she's carrying a torch of hope and peace. And around the torch, there's a ring of 5 colored stones representing all the peoples of the world. And then an image of the earth. So it's like all of us together holding the earth. And Chima is an ancient root word that means fire or light. So it's really seeing like the center fire, or the light of the people, and lighting the way to this new paradigm that we're all looking at together.
Osprey Orielle Lake, author, artist, and activist. If you enjoyed this interview, you may want to look at our interviews with other artists like wildlife painter Robert Bateman or poet and farmer Brian Brett. On the subject of the rights of nature, of course, we have a whole array of interviews, beginning with legal scholars Dr. David Boyd and Dr. John Borrows, and with many more to come. For The Green Interview, I'm Silver Donald Cameron. See you next time.